Hi, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Good to hear. For our viewers today, I'm Emily Barlow, Director of Communications for OneWorld Rowing, and I'm going to be interviewing MJ Wilson. Um, MJ, I'm kind of going to give the floor to you to introduce yourself. This will be an interview about your project, Application of Power, but if you just want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in lightweight rowing, I'll let you just take it from here.
So I didn't actually get involved in lightweight rowing until after college. I did row. My athletic career is kind of a very like step by step and just kind of focused on the next piece. But so I rowed for 4 years in high school, and I got into that because a little funny. My high school didn't have softball, and I was a big softball player. They did have rowing because it was a prep school, and so I got involved there, and it was kind of interesting. So I was one of the shorter athletes in high school. And for that reason, I kind of faced a sense of like, oh, you have good numbers, but you're too short. So you're going to be in these kinds of boats. But then finally my numbers were such that I was able to like earn my spot in the varsity eight and had kind of one of those like really spectacular seasons where a lot of races went really well. And that kind of led me to think like, oh, wait a second, like maybe I can do this in college too. And so I walked onto the team at Duke and again took it like step by step of like kind of 6 months here and then like reassess and like keep going. Um, and then kind of by the end of my 4 years at Duke, I did keep going for 4 years, and we got a new coaching staff my senior year, and again kind of had this like crazy, amazingly wonderful senior year where like, we made the NCAA regatta for the first time in program history, which is like a big goal kind of like every year along the way to do that.
Right.
And I was stroking the varsity four, and that was really fun. And so just kind of like leaving college, I didn't know what, rowing looked like after that. And I didn't think there was necessarily like a place for someone like me, but I'd grown to really like enjoy it and be super fulfilled as a person by being an athlete as well. And so I moved to Cleveland, Ohio for my job with it was through a fellowship called Venture for America, and it's like a very kind of like entrepreneurial oriented place, like the organization was. And then I was in a venture capital firm for 2 years there. And kind of while I was there, I got involved in coaching at the Foundry in Cleveland.
Mhm.
And then it was another kind of like one of those like moments where there was a coach who kind of came in, and there were a couple other athletes who were interested in kind of pursuing at like a higher level of rowing. So I remember there were like several months where I was like just doing all my training on my own, kind of like consulting a little bit with my college coach of like what should I be doing for workouts. And then ultimately, like that summer of 2017, I was officially coached there, and I got to race at club nationals for the first time in like the lightweight intermediate single, and that was really fun and did pretty well. And then I raced kind of the club scene and starting to race trials events basically from 2017 through 2019, but kind of each step along the way I was kind of navigating my career and navigating rowing as well, and kind of trying to figure out like how do you piecemeal this together. And so in 20 at the end of 2018, or towards summer 2018, I was like building what I was like pretty happy with, some decent momentum in rowing. But I decided with another woman to found a company. We were accepted into an accelerator in Detroit, and so I moved from Cleveland to Detroit to work on this company. Ultimately, she then let me know that she did not want to continue working on the company, so I had to kind of figure out what I wanted to do during that time. And so I grounded myself with continuing to train for rowing out of Detroit Boat Club, which was a lot of fun. And I also decided, I did some kind of like investigation of something I've been thinking about for a while. I decided to kind of begin the process of taking the classes I needed to apply for and go to medical school. Um, and that ended up being a very long process. But I did end up getting to race that 2019 season for a couple different clubs. So I spent some time with my family in South Carolina, and was able to train again, just completely on my own, following a training plan from my Cleveland coach. And I ended up taking a little trip to Florida to just kind of like see like what was my speed, and it was a lot slower than the other athletes in Florida, but it was really cool to see like that level that they were executing at and be like, okay, like this is what's going on. And 2019, as I'm kind of writing about in the book, ended up being a kind of a big year where a lot of lightweight women were going to Florida, just kind of like somewhat independently of one another. It was just like Florida was the place to be.
Right.
And so then I was able to be a part of a doubles camp there. And then I started my post-bac program and trained out of Philly and for Vesper for like kind of the remainder of that season. So that is kind of my background in the way rowing.
Very cool. It's cool that, you started with, I think I'm like, going to do this for a little bit and then reassess, like you were talking about. And then you've really, been in it for a long time at a pretty serious level. I mean, a lot of people, don't go very far, like after college, that they're like, oh, I did it. I mean, I was an athlete. Now I'm going to kind of transition to something else. And so it's really cool that like you stuck with it and then, decided to take on this project of application of power. So for our audience, if you just want to kind of dive into what that project's about, at what point you kind of decided to start writing a book on lightweight rowing.
Yeah. So again, so that was kind of I stopped rowing towards the end of 2019. I kept thinking I would stop like here and there, but I was given a lot of opportunities. Like Detroit asked me to race the head of the Charles if I wanted to race like their bid for head of the Charles. I'm like, of course I did. So I kept racing that fall a little bit longer, did some races, but I found it really difficult to balance the demands of being a student athlete without the support and infrastructure that comes from college athletics of being a student athlete. It was like really difficult, and then to add the weight piece of like cutting weight while you're also like intensively studying for classes was a lot to handle. But so by the end of 2019 and going into 2020, the lightweight rowing scene was it was a little bit different in that, so I just come off of this 2019 season training in Florida for a while, seeing what speed was out there and just the determination of the American women. I was like, something is going to happen. Like, I don't know what, but like, I just felt this kind of energy among all of the athletes, and getting to like know them and train with them and against them was a really incredible experience for me. Like, I just took so much from like learning from these women. And the kind of writing on the wall at the time was that 2020 was going to be the last year for the lightweight rowing to be in the Olympics. I think I know I was very surprised. I think a lot of people were really surprised in December 2020 when it was announced that lightweight rowing would continue for 2024. But at the time I was like, okay, this is kind of it. And for me, a book that had been really profound for me as an athlete, I did not come from a family that was very athletic, and I kind of like had this like drive to be athletic, and I really enjoyed pushing myself physically in like swimming and field hockey and rowing in high school. And then it was kind of like, oh well, like how far can I go with this, because I didn't like see kind of what that looked like. I had a couple of cousins that were decent athletes, but in my immediate family, and I didn't have any like female athlete role models to look up to. But so this book, I have it here, and it was like a huge inspiration for application of power. So it's called Gold in the Water, and it's about kind of like swimming, and it really like dove into the intricacies of the like swimming athletic experience. And so I kind of saw kind of, I hesitate to use this word like memorializing, but like, kind of like being like, this is what this like unique sport was that existed for 25 years at the Olympic level. And these are the amazing people that were a part of it. So that I think was like kind of the whole inspiration for it. So in 2020, January 2020, that's when I started working on it. There were a couple of pieces that had come together. I realized like, okay, I do know a lot of these women. I reached out to several of them to see if they were open to being a part of it. And a lot of them were. And so that's kind of, I think, kind of what got the ball rolling. And I was also able to connect with kind of the author of the book and see, okay, like how did he research his book? Like what are the things that I need to do and be thinking about and be considering so I can do this to the best of my ability.
Gotcha. And kind of what was your research that you went into this project? You said obviously like a lot of contact with the women directly, interviews, I'm guessing. So yeah, what was like your research method? And then was there anything that really surprised you in getting to know these women on this sort of level?
Yeah, so the research method was it was a lot of interviews, a lot of Zoom interviews,
Right.
especially as COVID happened, because this started in January 2020, and it was about kind of the trials were canceled on, it was either the Friday or the Saturday. I can't actually recall off the top of my head before they started the following week. And I was going to go down there and see trials in person. And then it was like, okay, and I know COVID has affected so many lives in so many different ways. But it was kind of like a big reassessment moment for, okay, look, this book is going to be a little bit different. What is it going to look like now? Um, and so I went from like kind of having phone calls with 4 different athletes to later on like looping in more people. So having more Zoom calls and talking with more athletes and also coaches kind of about their experiences. And so the big goal is that whoever chose to be a part of this project, I tried to be really inclusive and reach out to everyone, and have let people opt out if they decided that it wasn't right for them. But the goal is that it is ultimately really additive to the people who are a part of it and the people who read it. I just think that there is such like a beautiful like strength that I'm working really hard to articulate, that is exemplified by these women and the coaches and the experience of lightweight women rowing. And so that's kind of the goal. And then I was able to go to Florida for a little bit of January and February to kind of see the ending of like some of the training that was going into trials. And so just like watching those races in person, speaking with some athletes in person, and was able to see Molly and Michelle race at trials too. I was not able to go for any overseas sort of racing experience. So with that, it's been a lot of like rewatching races or even rewatching like former world rowing championships online to kind of like get things and then like check back with like person be like, so can you tell me about this race, like after I'd seen it and had some thoughts and wanted to know if they were on point or not.
Mhm. Right. And I mean, the one thing about, not the one thing, but one thing about lightweight rowing that's so interesting than, the other boats, especially the eights, fours, and quads, is that they are more independent, and taking those trips together and making those connections with people. It's just very different that the ownership is so much more on them and the individual, and there's less of that sort of organizational support. Is that something that, what was some of the women's comments on that? This divide between rowing, that there are there's this difference between, what boats you are, if you're open versus lightweight and things like that.
Yeah. And then I also realized, maybe we can look back to this later, but a couple things that surprised me, there's a few things that I wanted to earmark for that. But yeah, I think you really hit on it when you said the word ownership. Like it is like an ownership, like in a financial sense of like your career, like you gotta figure out how to fund it or get other people to fund it for you because you're not going to get a lot of institutional support. I think, traditionally people have, valued, like the big boats, the eights especially, or like even like men's rowing higher to some extent. I think that's a little bit different though because of the profound impact of Title IX on rowing. And so that's like I remember at Duke, like we were a fully funded varsity team and the men's team was not, and it was kind of interesting to see. And I've lived in and worked in and exist in a lot of male spaces where I am like the one of few women. And then to kind of have that be that experience in college was a really empowering thing to see, like what can strong women do. but I do think that, kind of the ownership, it's like you have to navigate, like who is going to coach you, and like what training plan are you going to follow, and like does that align with your physiology super well? Like where are you going to get the boat? Like does your club have one that you can use? Like do you need to like rent one? Do you have to buy one? Like, there's just like a ton of different things. Whereas like if you're invited to a training camp, you are able to like use that equipment, and the coach is kind of a given, and they're making the lineups, and there is like kind of less of a cognitive burden. I mean, what's really cool about the trial system a lot is that like it is in some ways like both like a lot more inclusive, in that pay your race entry, show up and race, like that's it, like weigh in as well. But it's also really difficult because it's like to do that at a really high level, it does take an immense amount of input, and kind of tinkering and feedback from people to like get it just right, because it is such a kind of razor's edge, for a lightweight woman to really excel, of like how much is too much, how much is like just the right amount of what you need to be successful in the sport.
Right. And what would you say was like the common remark about what was most daunting for the women? Was it, making weight, the financial aspect? Did you see like a common thread among their commentary about what was the most daunting?
I really think it was pretty individual in that case. I think making weight is something that is not talked a lot about even within the sport of lightweight rowing. It's a lot of like kind of like suffer in silence on your own until you figure it out, and then like good for you, and then it's still a little bit of suffering, because there aren't a ton of great resources out there to help someone with this very specific physiological situation of like being immensely strong and powerful at 125 pounds and weighing in at that weight 2 hours before you race. A lot of even professional like registered dietitians don't fully understand what that entails physiologically. So it can be really difficult to get that good advice and make weight really effectively, so that you don't sacrifice any of your power, and that that the weigh-in is ideally like extremely uneventful. It's like, okay, I stepped on my scale, I'm gonna have a little sack water and like let's go. Not like it shouldn't, like if it's a big kind of like relief, that's kind of a sign of like, okay, like something's a little bit off, we need to figure out like what that is, to make the weigh-in like more uneventful next time. I think the other pieces, I mean, the financial pieces are definitely really challenging as well. And there is a sense of like every single year, like, you're working, and I'm going to remove myself from this because, but I will like this, I'm not necessarily, I'm going to say we, but I'm not speaking for myself necessarily, but it's this sense of like, you're working so hard every single year to try to make the national team, or, like set yourself up for the Olympics. And each year it's like, it's like every year, like the quad camp is somewhere else, or, like you need to find your doubles partner. And it's like each year the pieces are shifting and the players are shifting, and you don't know like who is in and who is out, and like where's the city to be for quad camp, and like how do you get an invite, and like all of these like little things that you're also trying to manage, like while you're also trying to like like feed yourself and like make sure you can have health insurance, and or forgo health insurance, and different things like that. So I think finding, and then I think for some it was like finding that partner that can go the distance with you, and like is really in alignment with like your goals and your execution style, and like that you can, you're going to be spending a lot of time together. And so like how do you find this person and navigate like your rowing lives together, and how do you set yourself up to be a really good partner for them, and just kind of, there's a lot to navigate in terms of like being a lightweight rower.
Right. And then, I mean, as you said, you started Application of Power January 2020. And so, with COVID, as you said, it only complicated some of these issues, and, connecting with people and making sure you're in the same spot, and just physically and also mentally, like just a lot to juggle. So, I mean, the fact that the women were able to train and, continue to really shoot for the highest level of competition and trials and things like that, it's really commendable, for
Oh,
real. I mean,
absolutely.
right. It's pretty astounding what, those women were able to really get together and do this past year and beyond. Um, what would you say was some of their motivations with sticking with it? I mean, after, years of competing as lightweights, what kind of keeps them in the sport?
Yeah, I think it's again different for every person. And I think it also changes throughout an athlete's career as well. Um, some athletes were able to reflect on, who they were as a younger athlete versus an older athlete. And um, I don't want to overgeneralize too much with this because I definitely don't think this is the case with everyone I interviewed. But there is this kind of sense of like Olympic gold is the goal, right? Like that's the number one thing to achieve in this sport. Like
Right.
it's huge. Um, but then also for some athletes kind of came to this place themselves of like, you know, one athlete in particular described it as like she believed that like winning Olympic gold and being the best athlete physically that she could possibly be, like with the right partner and circumstances, like those weren't two separate circles. Like that was the same thing. Like if she achieved that, she would be able to have the, tangible reward of that. Um, and I think over time, that athlete in particular and several other athletes were kind of able to like broke down like, what are the components that really go into having like, a successful rowing career or race, or what is that together, and like what is like being the best athletic version of yourself in a boat with someone else, like what does that look like? And it's a little too complicated because it's so independent for each person. But kind of breaking that goal down a little bit more and addressing each like sub goal a little bit so that they were able to show up and kind of be their absolute best athletic self at 125 pounds. Um, and that I think itself was like they achieved that goal of like showing up and doing what they possibly could do given like the preparation and everything. So I think that was a huge motivation. I think given this past year for COVID, I mean, I think several athletes and obviously like Molly Michelle blew everyone out of the water, and it was incredible to watch and to see them go as far as they did. And, their excellence is they're some of the best athletes in the world, not just in lightweight rowing.
Right.
But I think some athletes like did go into Olympic trials recognizing I'm probably not going to win this. Like this is maybe not going to be the race that I win or make it onto the Olympic team, but they did it for kind of other reasons. And in some cases, two of the boats had more than two, but like two boats in particular that I'm thinking of had like entered in together in like for the March 2020 trials, and then throughout the year kind of like decided like, yes, we want to go for it again. We want to race in February 2021 as trials together, just because of the like level of like respect and trust and like intensity that I get from being with and I contribute to as being part of this boat with this other person. And it's just like there's literally nothing else in the world that like you can kind of like lean into in that way as you can with lightweight rowing. It can be kind of like addictive and like powerful in that way as well. And then just like knowing that you have this other person that you've like built something incredibly special with. It's just like a unique experience that you can't really replicate outside the sport.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, I remember after Tokyo finished, and I think it was Molly, it might have been Michelle, but I want to say it was Molly. And she had an Instagram post, and it was with a lot of the competitors in the boat category, and they were, hanging out after the races. And her caption spoke something of, we all went through this together. Our experiences are really shared in a lot of ways. And it's incredible. Like she was just saying how incredible it is to, accomplish something racing, A finals, and just in the category with so many strong athletes. I mean, really just hearing her, after her race, saying it's just great to be on the other side of it and to really reflect on the experiences and the accomplishment it is to compete at that level. It was just something really, touching to hear her say over, an Instagram post. It was great.
Yeah,
Um,
and I love that like the athletes are able to share their voices through their Instagram pages. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, as I'm director of communications, and most of my job is, being on our Instagram, and it's great to really connect with a lot of rowers and organizations, on that level and seeing what they're up to. It was, really cool to see during trials what people were doing and kind of where they were in their training, and then after that, and how a lot of them are planning out the next few years of, I'm going to keep in and I'm going to be doing this and stuff like that. So it's great to kind of see a lot of athletes, as competitors, but also as people too. And then you get to recognize, they are really human. Like, people have a lot going on, and the fact that they are elite rowers on top of all of the other, struggles of being human in today's world is just really interesting to, get to know them like that. Another question I have, in your experience and in the athlete's experience, where can, supplemental support be most helpful to them in their training? Like
Yeah,
financial support, outreach, advocacy, things like that. How can that be the most helpful for them?
yeah. So I actually reached back out to the athletes to kind of gauge their thoughts and feelings on this. And I want to make sure I don't want to miss anything. So give me just a second.
Okay, you're good.
But I mean, I think I've looked at my background. I worked in venture capital, so I understand a little bit about like business and financial systems. And while I don't, understand exactly all the underpinnings of like paying athletes and athlete salaries, like there's no way that you know uh, you would be able to pay an athlete to do like under the current circumstances, just like the inflows aren't that you could like pay an athlete a full-time salary to do this. But it is difficult because they have to supplement and find other means to allow them to have enough like time for like work and recovery, and train, or like with work I mean training and recovery and everything else. So I think especially kind of there's a couple of like upfront costs, there's a couple of ongoing costs, and then there's a couple of like other things. But the piece that I definitely don't want to miss that's like not financially related would be a greater facilitation somehow, between like either recently retired athletes yielding support to kind of like recent college grads and who are interested in doing this, or even current U23 athletes, just kind of like another cross line. And then or like older athletes, I think it can be a burden for some athletes, especially as they're focused on their own training, to then like be like, oh, can you also give advice to these people? And it can be a little tricky and nuanced, especially if they're going to be a direct competitor. But figuring out a way so that like some of this knowledge can be transferred, so that it's not like we're reinventing the wheel every single time for every single athlete. Because there's a lot of like little like tips and tricks that can be like passed on, and often are if you're in like the same club as another like older athlete who's going and competing at worlds, like that oftentimes like they share a lot of insight and information, and that's like really really helpful. But sometimes you might be training on your own and have no idea and not know how to connect. So that is some sort of facilitation around that would be really helpful. Otherwise, logistically, it's like to do the sport, you need a boat. And if you don't have a boat that like fits you, finding some sort of way that's not like, okay, like now you owe, like anywhere between, call it like $6,000 to $15,000 for a boat. Like that's, especially as like a young, 20 something, that's like a really big financial burden, fear,
Right.
trauma to go enter into. So if there's a way, I don't know, like for boat companies to potentially do some sort of ulterior business deal, whether like the thing that I have heard of that has existed at some boat companies, I don't know if anyone's still doing it, is like they would rent month to month with the idea that like, you could return this boat, or that money would go towards buying the boat, and the month to month fee would be somewhere between like $100 to like $200 a month. Like it really can't be more than that. And then this sense of like, because like what if something happens and like you realize this sport isn't for you, like which I think is a great thing. Like I think that's a wonderful thing if you realize like this isn't actually like for me and I don't want to be a part of it anymore. Ideally, you don't want to be locked into it financially with the boat, because that could be really complicated.
And
Um,
exploring it. I mean,
yeah,
figure out a lot of stuff with it.
a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah. So but like finding, you need good equipment for this. Um, another kind of like solution that we're kind of thinking about would be if there was like, greater awareness of flexible remote work, like maybe 20 hours a week that has benefits. Some athletes, like once you roll off your parents' health insurance, if your parents are able to continue to have you on your health insurance plan, that can be really tough. Some athletes do forego that because it's a really expensive thing. And there's also a certain element of like, you're traveling, and so like you might need care in like a southern state during winter training, but you might need care in like a non-southern state like Midwest or Northeast or like West
Right.
Coast
Yeah.
for the other part. And so it's like, where do you get your healthcare covered? It's just very confusing for people to navigate with this like nomadic lifestyle that you have. Potentially so like some sort of like healthcare coverage, whether that's through a job that like a job network that would help facilitate getting people these like 20-hour a week jobs, that you could do it. It's not like you need to be on at like 8 a.m. in the morning. It's like you can. And I think the world is changing in a way that could be really conducive to that. And then
Right.
let's see. And then potentially like some sort of organized, this could also help with some facilitation. I think elements would be like organized training trips for clubs that don't necessarily have like a greater infrastructure of like, oh yeah, and we always go here and like we have this figured out. And for like the one or two off athletes, because like being a lightweight athlete is kind of it's like a rare human that does that, and you're not usually concentrated all in the same space. It's like you have one here and then you have one here and then you have three here, and then it's kind of, so to like get all of those people together, I think under like a common facilitation where there's like maybe a trailer going down, and there's also like quads and pairs and doubles, so you can like try mixing in. I think something like that could be pretty helpful too.
Right. So, I mean, one, common thing that I think ties together all of those issues is, just a greater sense of collaboration among a group that, as we said, is scattered all over the states and, at different points in their life, younger versus older, but the needs all kind of are the same throughout. And so, yeah, like a network or just, greater communication between different people and groups, things that, just really make people closer and then can lead just to even more success in the future. I can see how athletes are really looking for, more of that moving forward. And it's, they recognize the need, and it's important for people that want them to succeed to also recognize that need. So would you say that that is, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, yes, I think like people recognize that like the need is like very much there, but it's like in order to have that collaboration, it's like usually a lot of that burden falls on a couple people, and it's like really, it's not unpaid labor, and it's complicated, and it's maybe like an extra expense. I'm thinking of coaches that have facilitated camps in the past. It's like, that's all unpaid work, and they have done, by and large, a really good job. And I think the athletes are incredibly grateful, but it is, it's a lot of burden of leadership, and then, extra time intensity. So if there were able to be like kind of like resource allocations or incentives to make it easier for certain programs to help host events, like a quad camp or a winter training trip or something like that, I think that could be pretty helpful.
Right. And, OneWorld Rowing is, trying to find our piece in that puzzle at the same time. collaboration is one of our, key values in the sport. And so it's interesting having a lot of conversations, with rowers and different heads of organizations and coaches at different high performance groups in the colleges, and hearing so much of the same, people reflecting on very similar things across those different groups, very much in line to what you're saying, and that the athletes, conveyed to you. It's just, there's a need for certain things to change in the sport. So, the future is definitely looking bright. I mean, people are definitely recognizing a lot of these needs. And so it's just a matter of implementing some, resources and just supplemental help amongst, this group and others that will just lead to a lot of successes. So, we're really hopeful at OneWorld Rowing that, things are going to look up, and, here's to, the future of the sport. So
Yeah.
It's very exciting. It's an exciting time. The term rebuild is always passed around. So we're definitely looking forward to the future. And one question I have is, what are you kind of expecting or hoping the outcome of releasing application of power is going to be?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different hopes with that. So at the end of the day, it's like the goal is to write a book. We've also have had maybe a larger than anticipated Instagram presence in some ways, and then smaller than anticipated in other ways. But the goal is that it'll be a complete project, and kind of it will exist, and things will continue forward. But that it can be a resource for athletes who are kind of like, well, what is this like black box of making the national team? Like, how does that happen? Like, I might be interested in it. Like, what goes into it? So it's definitely some knowledge transfer for like really eager athletes, and maybe some not so eager ones too. But like even, at kind of like whatever stage you're in, whether, you're a high school athlete that you row and you're like, oh, this is cool. This is a book about rowing, or a college athlete, or like someone who wants a little bit more of a understanding of like, oh, what is it like at this level? Like, how do I get there? But then especially kind of when the book got its name, I will say, which was about like 8 months into the process, I started also thinking about kind of implications beyond just that, like kind of like lifting up athlete stories, and also lifting up female athlete stories, because maybe it's because of like who I follow now on Instagram, but I feel like there's been this huge resurgence of like, or like surgence of, oh, like female athletics are great and awesome, and like we should follow more things and like pay them, it's like, I felt like when I was looking at this in like January 2020, it was, I mean, certainly not a novel idea, but I didn't see a lot of like financial and systemic support around women's athletics in the way that I see it now, which I think is a wonderful trend, and like, let's keep going. But kind of also outside of this work, because I recognize like not everyone is an athlete, I think kind of thinking about like truly like the application of power, and that in different contexts. So like in the rowing context, it's like literally thinking about like, like how are you, propelling the boat through the water with like your blade work and your leg drive and all these things, and like, building power outside of the boat so that you can transfer it into the boat, and like, with your weight cut, that it's successful so that you're not like losing power that you've gained before you cut weight to do that. But then also, so that's like kind of like the rowing aspect of application of power. But beyond that, we see kind of like these transferable lessons of like systemic power allocation. Like for example, the quad each year has been, kind of organized in a different city by a different coach. Because again, I think the incentives aren't necessarily like always aligned, that it's like a really replicable and scalable kind of process that does bode to a lot of like reinventing the wheel. But it's like, okay, can we take like some of these lessons as like what went well or like not so well in terms of kind of boat design or systemic design for like, and apply that to other systems like that are beyond rowing. And then also I think there's this component of partnership that I think can be really applicable beyond the sport of rowing. So it's like in rowing, it's like, you've got your other human together, you're going to weigh an average of 125 pounds. Like each person will be about 125 pounds, a little more, a little less. And you're going to have to like really sync your strokes and your styles, and like be on the same page about like your training plan and your race plan. And that's a really special, unique partnership. Um, and I think for me, like a big interest in writing this book is that like I've entered into uh like different partnerships, like whether like a business partnership where that didn't work out, and like that's fine. And I think that in some ways was successful because I don't think there's any kind of like shame in like quitting or realizing something isn't right for you. But I do think it was like, okay, like how could I have been a better partner? Like what are ways that I can you know learn, like how can you like co-create something really special together. And I think I've seen that so much in the sport of lightweight rowing that it's like, okay, I'd love for people to be able to like see that in other areas of life outside of the sport as well.
Definitely. And when is the release date of the book? That's something I'm very curious about. I can't wait to read it myself. So what's like,
Yeah.
you're towards the end of the timeline, correct? Yeah.
Yes. So we I say we me. um I don't have a date, and I wish I did. And I am somebody who I really like to do what I say I'm going to do, and to not hit the date that I originally set for myself with the publisher for the book in before the Olympics was like a really difficult thing for me personally. And so I've apologized to all the athletes and coaches that I've interviewed that I haven't hit that. And so, for anyone else, I am also sorry about not hitting that. But for the sake of the book itself, and for hopefully the like really positive impact that it can have on the athletes in the sport, I really want to be really cognizant of like bringing that forward in absolutely the best way, and really aligning with the editorial team in a really strong way on that. um, and so we don't have a date yet, but it will be coming.
I mean, it's definitely worth the wait. The finished product will be, worth any amount of time. And I mean, all the work that you put into it. It's, a very unique, interesting project that I think will have benefits, even obviously beyond the rowing community. So just for women in athletics and the sport as a whole. So it's definitely a very exciting project that you've been working on. I, have touched on all of my questions. Do you have any kind of like finishing stuff about your work or anything like that?
I did want to touch back on the something that surprised me in the process
Right.
of writing. So I have two answers for this. One is a kind of like shorter, like rowing specific answer, and then one is one that I think hopefully can potentially be applied outside the sport, but is taken through a very like rowing context. So the first one is that it's like erg scores matter and they don't. And for me, like I think it's good to have, like it's good to have ERG standards. But a lot of times, like even at the kind of top level, it's like a lot of these women, it's like, oh, the last time I did a 2K was like a long time ago. And they have their numbers to like back them up and be like, I am a strong, rower. But it's like it doesn't matter as much. But then also some athletes that have like been on the national team, like whether they had just made the national team or like were about to, um, and it's like their 2K was like somewhere like around like the 7:15 to 7:20 range. And for me, I was like, what? Like that's what I pull. Like, and I had no idea that it's like, oh, you could pull that. And like if you're a really effective technical rower and cut your weight really well and like work really well with other people and all these things that like have to add up as well, like you could potentially do it. Like it's not like completely out of reach for people. And so it's like sometimes you see like these numbers that are like broadcasted to places. And I actually had a couple other athletes talk about this of like, oh, well, like I applied to this program and they said I needed this score and I like didn't have it. And I got in and it was amazing. And it's like, yeah, I think there sometimes it's just like a miscalibration or understanding about like the numbers that you need. And it like that really, it matters, but then it also doesn't. It's like, what do you do with that?
Right.
Score
It's such
that
like a
matters.
holistic, I mean, it's more than just the numbers. As you said,
Yeah.
it's a lot of different qualities that go into it too.
Yeah. And it's like, of course, you need to be able to like row a boat effectively and you need a certain threshold of speed to do that. But exactly. And then the other piece that I did find surprising, and I didn't go into this book looking for this in any way. And I also want to like I'm not gonna I want to be really respectful to like everyone who's been a part of this, is that I kind of saw, like, I wrote this book, about women because like I'm a woman, I'm a female athlete, like I really care about this kind of stuff. But I was also able to see through like little lenses as to kind of like what, almost like what modern day sexism looks like. And I think it's not, I don't think it's very, maybe I want to see the best in people, but I don't think it's intended on the part of certain people. And I think it's also like largely systemic. So like, for example, like the boats at even the world championship level are, and like the athletes who are there who are about to race in these boats are not like thinking about this or like even care about this. It's like barely even a factor. It's like, we're here, we're gonna have the best races we can. But sometimes they're like the lightweight pair was like a men's lightweight pair, and that average crew weight is like 30 pounds heavier for a man than a woman. So it's like actually is like a different style of boat that you're kind of racing. And then the way that you would like physically coach a woman, like we don't like load our shoulders the same way that like a male rower might like load their shoulders. Like we need more coaching, like specifically like around like the way we like load our hips and like have our swing like through like our most powerful like part of our body. And then I think also sometimes like coaches, like male coaches or even female coaches, like maybe are more comfortable coaching men. And so it's like just little subtle opportunities, like slowly over time are like awarded to like the male athletes in a group versus the female athletes of group. And then like then you might also get like more friction or miscommunication with those female athletes if you aren't kind of like intentional and thoughtful proactively about that. So all of a sudden you might look around and be like, okay, like what happened here? Like all of a sudden this is a training group of a lot of men and like significantly less women. And so it's like those, like a lot of those cases, it's like no one is intentionally like trying to cause harm to women. But like these are just kind of like the big systemic effects that kind of like compound over time. And then the last one I'll say, because this is like kind of an exciting thing, is that it like leads to an exciting thing, is that a lot of the research about like really helpful training plans has been extrapolated from like male bodies and then like kind of given to female bodies and are like just like maybe modified in some way. And I know there's a ton of differences like within individual female bodies as well. But there just hasn't been as much research on that. And so there is like becoming like more research in that area of sports science, like on the female body, into like the differences like anatomically and hormonally that we have, as to like how we can like generate more peak performance. And it's coming out of like Boston Children's Hospital with like Dr. Ackerman, who was a rower herself, is my understanding. And so like that's really cool to like kind of see these little things changing. But I guess like the big takeaway from that is like sexism is like kind of generally speaking, like not necessarily like always intentioned, but you need to kind of like address it with being really intentional and kind of like looking at like, oh, well, like what are the factors that are going on here? And like, what are the assumptions that are going into like this being the training plan or this being the available boats? And like, how can we be proactive in addressing those? So,
Right. They can be very subtle, but drawing attention, and it matters, the work you put into counteracting, reversing, and stopping a lot of that behavior. So that is really interesting. I mean, I hadn't really, thought about that. I rode in high school and some in college, and, I wasn't really in high school when I was with the, boys on the team. We're doing the same workouts, there wasn't, any sort of like attention to, oh, well, like, it was just a very like cohesive team. And so to think that, training plans can be, and sometimes, should be different depending on different needs, that is really interesting. So very cool. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really have appreciated getting to know you and your project a lot better. It's, fascinating to look at the sport from this point of view. So really commendable work, and we're really excited to, see it moving forward and to see where it goes, to, continue the work that you're doing, because it is so important. So MJ, thank you so much.
Cool. Yeah, thank you, Emily. I'm really excited for, what you guys are doing at OneWorld Rowing. I think it's really unique. And even just like looking back, like I'm not rowing anymore at that level. I'm a master's rower now. It's great. But I was just like, oh, like these resources and like the, intentional conversations that you're having with, so many different people across the sport and at different levels and different levels of support. It's kind of like, it's very cool to see like how you guys are thinking about like kind of problem solving some of the really sticky and challenging areas for elite rowers. So I think everyone's really grateful for the work that you guys are doing.
Well, thank you so much. All right, so you can follow MJ Wilson at her project at Application of Power on Instagram, and we'll be in touch. Thank you so much.
Of course.